Hello, this is a module on an aspect of pragmatics, which is speech acts. Let us begin with something very simple about language and communication. We convey and understand meaning through language, but language is also a form of action. This idea was given by the philosopher J.L. Austin in 1962. That is, speech is a form of action. Let us begin with the use of language in sentences. We convey something in the form of a sentence. A sentence is a string of words which is uttered by someone to someone else. Thus, it becomes a speech act. For example, if I say, I promise or I bet, this is an action that I am making. This simple understanding is the basis of pragmatics, how language becomes meaningful in use. And it is different from a sentence in the sense that there is a speaker and there is a hearer, and this then becomes an utterance. A sentence is also an utterance, and an utterance is a speech act. That is, now we would represent a sentence as S, but S is also U. U is the utterance. Now, every such utterance takes place in a context, and this is then called the context of utterance. The context of utterance involves a speaker, a hearer, and we will talk about the speaker as S and the hearer as H, and of course, the conditions in which the act is performed, which is the context of that utterance. Now, we can see from what has been said that a speech act is action. That is, it is performative. It performs an action. When we use language, we perform actions in contexts where they are understood as meaningful and effective. Therefore, Austin distinguishes between three kinds of acts. He says that the sentence is a locution or a locutionary act. Locutionary would be L-O-C-U-T-I-O-N-A-R-Y, a locutionary act. It comes from the word locution, to speak. Now, that is the sentence. Then Austin speaks about an illocutionary act. The illocutionary act is the utterance of the speaker. The locutionary act is the sentence, and the illocutionary act is the utterance. And the perlocutionary act, the third kind of act, is the effect of that locution, of that act on the hearer. So, we have three parts to a speech act, that is, the locutionary act, the illocutionary act, and the perlocutionary act. Now, let us understand it further. The locutionary act has sense. The illocutionary act has force. What do we mean by this? The locutionary act is the meaning, the propositional meaning of the sentence. The propositional meaning is the logical meaning which is contained in that sentence, which we normally understand as being the meaning of the sentence. But when it is spoken by someone, it has something else in it. It has a force, which is the illocutionary act. The force is the illocution. Now, this has been explained by a linguist, Jeffrey Leach, in his book Principles of Pragmatics. And to quote, sense is the propositional content or logical meaning of the sentence. Force is the act performed in uttering that sentence. That is, asserting, questioning, etc. So, we might say that force is the real meaning and sentence is the logical meaning. Force contains the real intention of the speaker. A speaker may utter a sentence, but may mean something else by uttering that sentence, and that contains the force. Now, in an utterance, sense and force can be the same or they can be different. Let us take an example. Suppose we are sitting at the dining table and someone says, pass the salt. Now, if we analyze this sentence, we have a locution, and the locution is the imperative sentence, pass the salt. This is an imperative sentence in terms of its sentence structure, but it has the illocutionary force of requesting. We do not take the meaning as being that whether the person is able to pass the salt or not, but we clearly understand that the person is making a request to us to pass the salt. The perlocutionary act is understood by the hearer as being a request to pass the salt. So, here of course, we have a context, appropriate context in which this sentence would be meaningful, and the appropriate context would be that if there is a meal, that people are sitting at the table and eating and they need salt, and salt is there on the table. So, all these conditions would make that act, that speech act, pass the salt as meaningful and as an utterance which is made by a speaker and understood correctly by a hearer, and the hearer would then go on to pass the salt or do that action which is requested. So, it is only under the right conditions that a speaker can use an utterance to perform an action. It involves the presence of some conventions of saying something. That is, there is some already understood manner, that's what we mean by convention, an already understood manner of saying something. And of course, it involves some persons who are interacting, the speaker and the hearer, as said earlier, and it has some circumstances or a context. The correct and complete performance is needed. That is, obviously, a sentence has to be spoken. It can't be an incomplete sentence, but it has to be a complete sentence. And thoughts and the intentions which are appropriate for that action are behind that sentence. That is, some intention is there in the speaker to perform that action. Now, we can go on to understand this further, that in terms of their grammatical structures, sentences can be declaratives, interrogatives, and imperatives, while speech acts in them can be those of declaring, questioning, requesting, commanding, etc. From this, we might understand that speech acts are many more than sentence forms. Sentence forms may be limited, but speech acts can be many more. Now, take another example. It will rain today. There is a sentence, it will rain today. It has a grammatical structure. It's that of a declarative sentence. It's a statement being made, and the speech act is that of declaring. So, what is the speaker doing here? The speaker is doing the action of declaring something, that is, that it will rain today. Here, there is no difference between sense and force. Sense of the sentence, which we understood as the logical meaning of the sentence, involves the proposition being made, which is that it will rain and that it will rain today. There is a condition that is being predicted. So, all that is part of the logical proposition of the sentence. The force here is that of declaring that it will rain. So, the speaker intends to make a declaration, and there is no difference between the sense, that is the sentence, and the force, which is the utterance. However, we can see that in some sentences we are very clear about the action which is being performed. This has been described by Austin by the term performative. That is, a sentence may contain a verb which tells us about the act being performed. For example, I warn you to be careful. I declare the convocation closed. I name this ship Enterprise. I protest. I insist. So, what do we have here? We have verbs like warn, I warn you to be careful. Declare, I declare the convocation closed. Name, I name this ship Enterprise. protest, I insist. So, we have the verb insist. All these are performatives. That is, they clearly indicate that the action that is being performed is the one described in that verb. So, these are called explicit performatives. The verb is there in the sentence, and so we come to know that the act that is being performed is of a particular kind. Now, declaratives are speech acts that change the world because of the very fact that they are uttered. The utterance itself brings about a change in the state of affairs in the world. Let's say we take up a sentence like, I pronounce you man and wife. Now, that by so saying, the priest has actually made a change in the state of affairs in the world, that the man and the woman have become husband and wife by virtue of that pronouncement, I pronounce you man and wife. So, here the act is being performed as an explicit performative. It is a declarative by use of the word pronounce, and it is something which changes the world because of the very fact that it is uttered. I declare the sports meet open also has that same force of declaration which is there in the performative verb declare. But sometimes there is no verb which conveys the force. For example, be careful and I warn you. Now, if we take these two examples, in one there is an explicit performative which says I warn you. Now, be careful also has the same force of warning, but the first does not contain the performative verb. Be careful does not contain the performative verb, it is an imperative. I warn you also is an imperative, but it has a verb in it, warn. So, speech acts are actions performed via verbal utterances in appropriate conditions. For example, I promise to return your money is a successful act if it is sincerely meant by a speaker who has actually borrowed money, and only that person can then say, I promise to return your money. So, that act of promising, saying I promise to return your money, is an act which becomes meaningful only if certain conditions, that is, a person owes another person some money, that condition prevails, and so there is an explicit performative verb over there which says, I promise to do so. So, these conditions are called Felicity Conditions for the performance of a speech act. These have been defined by J. Searle as the following: Sincerity Conditions, Propositional Content Conditions, Preparatory Conditions, and Essential Conditions. Now, we can understand these further by saying that sincerity conditions are where a person has intentions, only then the act will have force. Propositional conditions are, as in the example, it will rain tomorrow, will be true only if the proposition pertains to the future, and it will be logical only then. Preparatory conditions, according to Searle, are the background circumstances of the speaker and the hearer prior to the performance of an act. For example, a request needs the conditions that A. the hearer is able to do the action, and B. that the hearer will not do it in normal course unless told to do so. Let's say we give somebody an instruction, write a letter. Now, we assume that the hearer should be able to do that action, and secondly, that the hearer will not do it in normal course unless told to do so. Only in such conditions can the speech act be performed. Then finally, there are the essential conditions. The essential condition is the point and purpose of the utterance. In requesting, the speaker wants the hearer to carry out an action. In promising, the speaker wants to commit himself to that action, and only then will that act be fulfilled, where the speaker would say, I promise to return your money. So these are the different kinds of speech acts. Some of the speech acts do not contain the performative verb. For instance, a judge may say guilty, and by saying guilty, the judge is actually performing an act of declaring a person guilty. Or a referee may say out, and by simply saying out, there is a declaration that the player is out. So these are the 4 conditions for the performance of the speech act, which are called Felicity Conditions, that is, to repeat, Sincerity Conditions, Propositional Content Conditions, Preparatory Conditions, and Essential Conditions. So to sum up, the speaker S and the hearer H realize some meaning is intended. Then the speaker has some illocutionary goal in mind, that is the intention of the speaker, and the utterance has you, the utterance is you, and it also has a sentence meaning, and speaker intends hearer to recognize the force by the utterance. I'll repeat this. The speaker intends the hearer to recognize the force by the utterance. So we may reduce it to an equation like S means F by U. That is, speaker means a force by the utterance, by uttering something. Now we come to the classes of illocutionary acts. In all these types of illocutionary acts, as have been mentioned, there are constitutive rules. What are constitutive rules? Constitutive rules govern the appropriate behavior and constitute the form of an activity. So going over the different classes of illocutionary acts, we see that assertives, for instance, have a truth value. That is, in asserting, affirming, informing, there is a truth value which is contained in that act. That is one of the constitutive rules. In expressives, it is the feelings of the speaker. For example, I congratulate you, complaining, greeting, apologizing. These have constitutive rules of conveying the feelings of the speaker. Then we have directives. Directives are there to get the hearer to do something. For example, requesting, ordering, forbidding, warning. For example, we have a sentence like trespassers will be prosecuted, or no pets allowed. So these are directives which have a certain constitution, that is, they are under the constitutive rules of forbidding or warning someone from something, doing something. Then we have commissives. Commissives commit the speaker to a particular course of action. For example, pledge, refuse, invite, promise. So in doing these acts of promising, inviting, pledging, or refusing, the speaker is committed to that act. Let's take an example of a sentence such as shut the door. Now in shut the door, what kind of act is being done? It is to get the hearer to do something. It is directing. Whereas in a sentence like I pledge I will serve the country, what kind of act would that be? It would be a commissive. The commissive would be committing the speaker to do something. So if we analyze this speech act, that is, I pledge I will serve the country, we can break it up into various parts. The sentence form here is a declarative. I pledge that I will serve the country. The speech act is a commissive, that is, the speaker is committed to serve the country. The preparatory condition here is a belief that it is necessary to do the action, that is, to serve the country. That action is a belief of the speaker, and therefore it constitutes the preparatory condition. The sincerity condition is the intention of the speaker to serve the country. because in so saying, the speaker is declaring the intention to serve the country. And the essential condition is that need for the speaker to do something as committed. That is, the need for the speaker to serve the country. And secondly, that the speaker is in a position to do as stated. After all, you can pledge to do something only if you are in a position to do so. So, these are the constitutive rules and the conditions which make up the successful performance of a speech act in a sentence like, I pledge to serve the country. Let's take another example. Take the sentence, I want to complain about the delay. Here the sentence form is again declarative. The propositional content is that a delay has occurred, that is in the past, about which there is a present intention to influence a future event. I want to complain about the delay. The speech act here is expressive. If you remember, expressives are ones which convey the feelings of the speaker. So, here the feeling of the speaker is expressive of dissatisfaction, but there may be additional form of commission or commissive, as the speaker wants something to be done by the hearer about the complaint. So, we have the expressive, which is the expression of dissatisfaction, as well as another intent or an additional force of commissive, that is something to be done about the delay. The preparatory conditions for the performance of this act are speaker believes hearer is in a position to do so. After all, we can only complain to somebody who is in a position to hear that complaint. Therefore, speaker believes hearer is in a position to do so. S, that is speaker, wants hearer to do so. Speaker believes hearer has some relation to or responsibility for that past event, that is for the delay. So, how many things do we have here? The speaker believes hearer is in a position to do something about the delay. The speaker wants the hearer to do something about the delay, and the speaker believes hearer has some relation to or responsibility for that delay. Only then we could say something like, I want to complain about the delay. Then the sincerity conditions are that speaker is dissatisfied, speaker wants to improve the matters, and the essential condition is that something unsatisfactory has happened and some redressal is required. Given all this, the sentence then, I want to complain about the delay, will be a communicative, meaningful speech act. So, the act of complaining is felicitous only when the hearer is the person who can do something to improve the state of affairs or is in some way responsible for it. There has to be a belief that the past event and the present state of affairs is highly undesirable. Only then will the utterance have the force of complaining. To summarize this talk and this consideration of speech acts, we have seen that meaning is a combination of the literal sense of a sentence and the force of an utterance as uttered by a speaker. Only then does the hearer understand what is meant. Therefore, we take each utterance as a speech act. The performance of such acts is regulated by certain constitutive rules or conditions, which are called Felicity Conditions. As such, they are bound by conventions, conventions of use, conventions of language. There are various kinds of speech acts, such as have been mentioned, assertives, declaratives, expressives, and commissives, and understanding the performance of speech acts is the basis of pragmatics. There are many other sub-classifications of speech acts under these major heads, but we will understand them further in a consideration of indirect speech acts. Thank you.